The first presidential debate is being described as crazy, chaotic, out of control, a 50-car pileup. I'm sure you've heard some of these reviews. The smarter angle we're going to take today is whether or not it was consequential. We are not going to call winners and losers. You have a lot of people doing that. What we're going to do is talk about what's most notable from the debate. And I'm also going to take you a little bit behind the scenes. Some of you have asked some really interesting questions about debate format, having to do with the broadcasting format and how that impacted the debate. And I have a little experience in that area, so we're going to talk a little bit about that. But first, why are people calling this debate so completely out of control? Well, both candidates are receiving some criticism, and they fall into two major categories. President Trump is being criticized for interrupting too much. Vice President Biden is being criticized for name calling. Both candidates did a little bit of all of that, and there was a lot of crosstalk. So a lot of people talking at the same time. It was difficult to hear or really understand what was happening. That said, three big takeaways for you. Number one, both candidates did not introduce any brand new big blockbuster policy solutions. So you didn't miss that if you tuned out early. There was nothing new, no new policy introductions of note. Second thing you should know is that both candidates had a question they were asked, and in the way that they answered, sparked a new news cycle. So President Trump was asked about whether or not he would denounce white supremacists. Vice President Biden was asked about stacking the courts, adding liberal justices to the courts. The way in which both candidates handled that question have now led to other news stories. And third thing you should know is the one fact check we're going to do focusing on pre-existing conditions, because this is such a big data point when we're talking about COVID-19 or healthcare in America overall, and I think it would be really helpful. Both candidates were sort of right and sort of wrong about this. Vice President Biden said 100 million Americans have pre-existing conditions. President Trump said no. Here's the reality from the U.S. government. The U.S. government says when you look at non-elderly Americans, the number of Americans with pre-existing conditions range from 50 million to just under 130 million. So you should know that there's a range. There's not just one number that everybody agrees upon. Those are the three things you should know. Let's talk about debate format. Some of you have asked, well, if it was so chaotic, why don't you just cut the mics? Cut the mics, get the hook, slow everything down. It's a great question. The reality is in broadcast journalism and live events like this, you would rarely, if ever, cut someone's mic. And the reason why you do that is because of ethics. It becomes very quickly editorializing the content. And what I mean by that is, let's say if you decided to cut President Trump's microphone when Vice President Biden was giving an opening statement, but you didn't cut Vice President Biden's mic when he said something under his breath when President Trump was talking. You see what I mean? To make those editorial calls in the middle of a live event is very difficult and impacts what the viewer actually experiences. So there may be other ways to try to gain control, but that wouldn't be your first choice. Now, if both candidates agreed at the beginning of the debate that during opening statements, their mics would be down, we could definitely do that. And we might see some formatting change. It's interesting to note that there is a commission of presidential debates. It is a nonpartisan nonprofit developed during the 1980s. Their whole job is just to make sure presidential debates happen, which might seem strange to us because we're used to them happening. But in reality, over the course of American history, they didn't always happen all the time. And so this nonprofit was developed to make sure that they did for the benefit of the American people. They set the format, they choose their moderator. This is the goal: organize, manage, produce, publicize, and support debates for the candidates for the president of the United States. So they're in charge. And that's how we get our debate scheduled. That's how we choose the moderator. That's how we choose the format. The reason why I mentioned that is because I saw something very notable after the debates. As I looked across different networks, you had very different journalists asking very similar questions about whether or not we should have another debate because this was so chaotic. First of all, that's not the call of journalists or news networks. It's the call of the commission and the participating candidates. But a better question might be, well, how can we make formatting changes to make the debate more productive? We know Vice President Biden and President Trump are known entities to the American people. So how can we change the format so it's potentially a more productive conversation or even more organized, less chaotic? And we've done all sorts of different things over the course of history. If you go back to President Lincoln, the Lincoln-Douglas debates, the first candidates to speak in those debates would have 60 minutes. The other person following would have 90 minutes. And then the first speaker would have 30 minutes. That's how they did it. They did it over and over again. I don't know if we'll see that, but I'll be curious what you think is actually the format that would be the most productive. Okay, was this debate consequential? I'm going to give you two separate facts independent of the story. Number one, women are the majority voting bloc in America. Women vote at higher rates than men. Swing states are very important in the election, and you've heard the candidates during the debate mention the swing states: Wisconsin, Michigan, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Florida. The question I have for you is anything that we saw in the debate invigorating voters to turn out? There's all this question about mail-in ballots or showing up to vote in person. No matter how you vote, it takes a little energy. You have to be inspired. So my question for you is, what we saw from these debates, will it inspire key voters in these key states? That's how we'll know whether or not this debate is consequential, and I don't have the answer for that right now, so I'll leave it up to you. I'm curious to your feedback about all of this. Questions and comments, let me know. And as always, more on smarternews.com. Vice presidential debate next week. 'Tis the season. Here we go. We have about 30 days until the presidential election.